Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Demon Folklorist. I am, yes, the Demon Folklorist, and today we are going to be doing a Hellraiser Horrorathon. So this is basically a stream of consciousness, just like my Leprechaun series. If you're not here for that, there's the door, because I'm doing things the way I would like to do them, which is I watched all of these movies. There's like 8 of them. Oh my god. And I had to do commentary. I actually personally love the Hellraiser series. I didn't see it until a lot later in life, although I was always aware of the series. Pinhead, which is what he's called. He's actually called the Hell Priest in the stories. And Clive Barker cannot stand it that we call him Pinhead. I was always aware of him because he was a horror figurehead. We had all seen him before. There's something about, I think, his construction that we all sort of are a little bit fascinated with. I think that's why the Cenobites endure, and we still have movies coming out. The most recent one is from 2017. And yeah, so let's get started. I need to find my notes because they're all out of order. Also, something I completely forgot, this episode marks season 2 of my podcast. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening and for joining me for season 2 as I dissect this crazy series. All right, so 1987, Hellraiser comes out, and I'm just kind of like, how would you even begin to describe this movie to someone else? Me and my husband had watched it together. And he was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm really that interested in this. Like, I'll watch it with you, but like, I don't know. I think I saw part of it and I wasn't that into it at some other point in time. And I'm like, yep, sure. Whatever. And naturally he becomes fascinated because it's such a crazy ass movie. We have this character, Frank, who's literally dirty down to his fingernails. He is somebody who is consumed by desire. He wants more in this world. He seems to have sexual addictions and probably substance abuse, hard to say. But he ends up seducing his brother's wife, so he's a great person, obviously. Yeah, her name is Julia, and she's pretty important to at least the first 2 movies of the series. So Frank does open the box after seducing Julia, and Julia thinks they're going to run away together. He disappears. And the reason is because the box, called the Lament Configuration, or Le Marchand's box, is a portal. It's a puzzle that opens a portal to hell. And this hell is really interesting because they always seem to be luring in people, but they're not telling them the whole truth. So they're like, oh, you'll have all the pleasure and all the desire, anything you could possibly imagine. But what they don't seem to tell people is that this is a place of pain and suffering, and where flesh is pierced and, played with essentially for eternity by these Cenobites who were once humans. But their desires transmogrified them into these monsters who now try to capture people. This is also a deeply horny movie because Julia is just enamored with Frank. The things that she does so that they can be together, she must have thought she was in love with him. But, I mean, wow. It's amazing just how shitty people can be sometimes, because he actually seduces her on top of her wedding dress, and she still marries his brother. And now they've moved back to, I think, England. It's kind of implied that it's England, and that this old house that was in their family, that Frank was staying there, and she clearly has a torch lit for old Frank over there. Frank then Imhoteps back to life because his brother Larry, who's married to Julia, accidentally bleeds on the floor where he disappeared, and he is reborn of it in a very creepy sequence that I love because it's all practical effects. It looks great and it's just so gross. Frank comes back, but he doesn't have any skin. It's all been torn off in hell. So he has Julia go get him victims so that he can assume their skin. And that's what I mean by Imhoteping him. So I'm making a mummy reference. I'm a huge fan of the Mummy. So yeah, that's why. That's immediately what it made me think of. What I enjoy most are those practical effects, like I was saying. It's all like viscera and blood. And there are a couple parts that unfortunately don't really work, like when they're trying to pierce skin and you can tell it's not real skin, because who would do that? That's insane. But it doesn't even look real. The rest of it is pretty gross looking, and you have to admire how much goes into that. All of this like stuff that they're trying to make that makes you think you're looking at what you think you're looking at. So that's pretty fun. And then yeah, Julia kills a bunch of men for Frank. Predictably, he betrays her. Like, we didn't know that he was a shit person. The thing that truly bothers me about Hellraiser is something so dumb. I hate her hair. Her hair kills me. I did not grow up in the 80s. So her hair and makeup just seem crazy to me. And she totally gets a glow up in Hellraiser 2. So I was very happy about that. It made it easier for me to watch. I'm like my mom. Like, we both have problems with bad hair in movies. It takes us out of the moment because it's like, why? Movies are stylized ideas of what life looks like, right? You would think some people would have some nice hair, but that's just us. Anyway, the original Hellraiser is plenty weird, and come on, it hooked us all. Like, we wanted to know more about the Cenobites and about their lore and how on earth this box was created and what they're doing here. Continually confused by the very ending where Christy's trying to burn the box and a homeless man goes and gets it and then transformed in this like bone dinosaur thing who flew away with it. Can anyone explain that to me? No? Okay. Because I'm a little confused there. So Hellraiser, I would give a solid 3 out of 5 pins on Pinhead's head. I think it's a good movie, but it's not my favorite. Although I still always tell people I think the first 2 Hellraisers are probably the best. But you'd be surprised. Some of the sequels are actually pretty decent, but we'll get to that in a minute. So Hellraiser 2, Hellbound. Oh, Lord. Again, I don't know how I would explain this one. Besides, they went to hell and it was weird. Like, we also see Pinhead's background. He was a military colonizer asshole, and he finds the box, opens it. It lullabies at him, and it's the only time it does this in the entire series, so I thought that was strange that they never picked that back up again or explained it. So he's like drawn in and taken to hell. He's sliced open and he gets pins stuck into him. I mean, that's gotta suck. Kirsty, who I completely forgot to mention in the first movie. Anyway, so while all this crap is happening with Frank and Julia, Kirsty is Larry's daughter and Julia's stepdaughter. So she comes in contact with the Cenobites. She accidentally opens the box and she ends up sending the Cenobites back to hell by solving the box. Unfortunately, her father dies because Frank puts his skin on. Gosh, I'm so bad at this. Frank puts his skin on and just like wears him. And it's all very traumatic for Kirsty. And I mean, like, can you blame her? Like, seriously, that's creepy. Anyway, also, like, Frank is a total fucking creep. So anyway, let's move on. Kirsty's going through it. She's now in a mental institution, and this is completely fair. She has seen some things that you can't unsee, and she's dealing with the grief of her father, and it also feels like a meditation on the nature of grief and how it never really ends. Like, you move past it, but it never truly ends. But that could just be me, like, reading into it. I like to think very deeply about horror movies. Anyway, this is probably my favorite Hellraiser, even though it's fucking insane. Like, bonkers. I don't even use the word bonkers. That's how bonkers it is. It's just the only way to describe it. So the same place that Kirsty is at is called the Channard Institute. It's run by Dr. Channard, who is a total megalomaniac, is doing horrible experiments on people in his asylum, and he is trying to find the box. He gets involved in this investigation and gets the mattress that Julia died on and resurrects her by sacrificing one of the patients in his asylum. So yeah, really scrupulous man, obviously. Hell looks like a series of very long hallways, and this kind of makes sense. It's all like a surrealist painting, very The Cell before The Cell came out. That came out in 2000. But yeah, like the doctor is such a megalomaniac after he's been cenobited, or cenobit. I'm going to go with cenobit. He's just like, I'll be taking over now, lads. And Pinhead's like, what? No. Also, like, Leviathan's just hanging out. And Leviathan's final shape, I might add, is a big 3D diamond. Like a big 3D vertical diamond. So, I mean, if you're still with us, right? Like, it just gets crazier from there. But anyway, Kirsty tries to warn the dipshit doctor to destroy the mattress. He doesn't listen. And yeah, Julia comes back. She's horrific because she also doesn't have any skin. She's all nerve and blood and all that, and like muscle. There's also this mysterious girl who was named Tiffany by a nurse. She doesn't talk and she doesn't have family. And she's like a big time puzzle cracker. That's all she does. She just solves puzzles all day. Kirsty naturally is mourning the loss of her father, and she's worried that he's in hell. She keeps seeing this figure being like, help, I'm in hell, with no skin on. It's actually Frank. She doesn't realize that until she's already in hell. And so we also have, like, there's always a random dude who's helping the girl, at least in these first couple of movies. I like that Hellraiser 3 actually just had, like, women for the most part, but we'll get to that in a minute. There's this really obvious character named Kyle. He's a good-hearted guy, and I have a soft spot for him because I love the idea of the himbo. So in movies, if you don't know, a himbo is like a dude who has a gigantic heart and no brain. He's just walking around being adorable, poor thing, and he's usually quite good looking. I wouldn't really say that Kyle's super good looking or anything, but I think it's nice that he helps her no matter what. No real shade to Kyle. It's just that he's not a full himbo, at least not by modern standards. And Julia and the doctor get into this like super weird relationship. And yeah, he brings her people to restore. And then naturally, like, I had kind of jumped ahead. I'm sorry. So much shit happens in this movie that it's actually really hard to tell it linearly. She tries to kill Kirsty. It doesn't really work out. But she does eat Kyle, unfortunately. The mysterious girl, Tiffany, opens the box. Hell opens up. The Cenobites emerge. Pinhead is like, nah, we're not going to take Tiffany. Let's take the doctor, because it was the doctor's desire that opened the door, not Tiffany's hands. Which kind of goes against, I feel like, the whole idea that this series gives us, that whoever opens the box, that's who they take. They really don't care who you are. But whatever. So Julia ends up leading the doctor into hell when the passageways are open. So they kind of like take the back door. And Kirsty goes in to find her dad. And the thing, like, that just kept hitting me was like, yeah, I mean, really, hell could be anything because nobody's ever seen it. And then not only that, every single person in hell is in their own personal hell. And it's all ruled over by the big, gigantic diamond in the sky Leviathan, who's just hanging out, you know, he's just vibing. Tiffany is in a fun house of her own trauma. There's clearly a toy of a baby with a sewn mouth, and it's just sort of like presented to her like a big image in the sky, and she's like, ah, and runs away. And I'm like, what is with the weird baby toy? Like, where are we going with this, guys? I don't know. It's all metaphor. It's all very high concept weird, so who's to say? Anyway, it's just all fucking ridiculous, but it is like an enjoyable type of ridiculousness. Like, it's fun. Like, I feel like they got so much into their own absurdity that they really leaned into it. They were like, this is hell. We're going to do whatever we want. Whatever. Anyway, Julia is now like a mistress of hell. She was brought back by Leviathan to feed him souls. And that's why the doctor's there, right? But the doctor gets Cenobit and tries to take over because he's a megalomaniac, like I was saying before. Bro is now like a weird monster thing that has like, it's almost like a reverse scorpion. He like has a tail thing attached to his head and he just floats around on it. It's very odd. He also has like these stop motion Tim Burton-y like tentacles that slice and dice, and I'm like, what went into this? Is this someone's fever dream or nightmare? Because he just kind of looks, to me, he looks silly, but whatever. I guess he's menacing. Kirsty ends up finding Frank's hell, which is like women who he can't really touch. They're like apparitions writhing in front of him with candles everywhere. And it's very much kind of like that id, that unconscious psyche from Freud, of like all his desires presented before him, but he can't have them. And it's like, Frank is basically all id. He is like if the id was a person. So I'm glad that he is in hell. And he tries to like seduce Kirsty. It's not even seduce. He just like, he was straight up gonna probably rape her. And then she's like, okay, I'll come willingly. I'll do anything. And then she fools him and burns it all down. And I'm like, yeah, go Kirsty. I always liked Kirsty as a final girl. And the movie just has like a million storylines. And it's like, even though it's not a super long movie, you're like, bro, could we tone it down? Because some of this is hard to follow. Julia gets to betray Frank. I mean, he did it to her in the first movie. He literally let her die by the hands of the Cenobites. So, like, it makes sense. Again, that's another thing that happened in Hellraiser. Like I said, way too many storylines. And I'll make that assessment about the first movie, too. I think there's just a lot going on and that maybe they could have pared it down. It's not really a justification of Julia's actions, but it's also kind of like, I get it, though. I get it. Like, she was crazy in love with this guy, or she just really wanted the D. I don't know. But he let her die. Anyway, Dr. Channing gets to be a sick fuck in hell, chopping left and right. Kirsty finds out that Pinhead was actually human at one point, so she confuses him with his former humanity because he doesn't even recognize a picture of himself and has to be convinced that, oh my gosh, I was actually human at one point in time, because they're convinced they've always been there. They haven't always been there, but really it just happens because it's in the script, and this is how Kirsty escapes hell. Then it becomes like Dr. Psycho versus the Cenobites as who's going to be the ruler of hell, and anytime a Cenobite dies, their bodies turn human. So it shows us that it was like their sins that turned them into Cenobites in the first place. All the other Cenobites die except for Pinhead. Julia tries to attack Kirsty, but is like skin suited by hell or Leviathan. I don't really know. But like she dies for some reason because it's in the script, and comes back again, except we find out it's actually Kirsty, and she was doing it to help Tiffany. Just very high concept weird. Predictably, Tiffany gets them out. Dr. Channing gets beheaded by Leviathan for some reason. Like, again, script. They get out, and then the mattress ends up claiming a moving guy, and I just have so many questions. But the way that this has now, like, formed is a 3D rectangle sculpture with body parts in it, and that becomes really important for the next movie. I have special love for Hellraiser 2 that I don't think the rest of the world may agree with. I give it a solid 3.75 out of 5. Like, I'm not going to pretend these are amazing movies because I have too many questions to give it higher than 3.75. But I do love them. I return to them every now and then. I think it's a really fun concept, just like in the Leprechaun movies, but you gotta lean in. If you don't lean into your own absurdity, you end up getting lost in stupidity. So, yeah. Anyway, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. I'm still astonished they got a third movie because Hellraiser 2 was just so weird that you're like, wow, really? Someone like greenlit another one after that one, but whatever. Unfortunately, the director of this movie actually died recently, so poor guy. But the rectangular revolving body part thing has now turned into like a statue. It's sold as art by a homeless man. Again, with the homeless man, I don't know. I don't know who this man is. I don't know if it's explained. It doesn't seem to be, but I'm sure someone knows enough Cenobite lore to tell me what the hell he is. Because he's probably like a Cenobite in human form. I don't know. Anyway, it's all been smoothed out, and it looks like a real sculpture. It's bought by this total douchebag of a man, and We also have an ambitious news anchor. Her name is Joey. She's struggling to find the right story that will give her the opportunities she wants. She stumbles upon a badly wounded man with chains out of him, and there's an electrical chain explosion seizure scene of that guy, and she's like, oh my gosh, I gotta hunt this down. One of the chains actually nicked her, and I'm like, normally doesn't that mean they've claimed her? It happens in other movies, so I'm just kind of like, what? Because there is continuity in these movies, it's just not as smooth as it possibly could have been. I'll get into that in a bit though. We've also got, honestly, I felt they kind of overdid this a bit, but we have like the evils of war. This is definitely talked about with Pinhead because he was like a colonizer. You could tell from his hat. You know, the colonizer hat. I always think of it as like the Jumanji hat because the dude was wearing it who's like the manifestation of his father who's hunting him down. Can't remember what his name is. We also see Pinhead's Cenobite transformation. Again, I don't know why they focused on this so much because I don't think Pinhead's humanity counts. Kirsty was able to confuse him, and I think it worked well enough for that, but to continue with it felt a little stupid. I'm not going to lie to you. So, anyway, JD, who's the guy who bought the art, he owns this club, the Boiler Room. He reaches his hand in this random hole in the statue, and it's like, yeah, that's a great idea in general. He gets like bitten by a rat. And then we have Joey the reporter makes friends with Terry, who is JD's old girlfriend, and she had been there that night and taken the boy who I guess had gotten in the way of the chains. I don't really know, they don't actually explain the boy in the first part, but anyway, she had been there and Joey had talked to her for a bit. Joey tracks her down, and then they become friends, and it's really very kind of wholesome and very sweet, and you feel bad for Terry. Terry's somebody who just has been really seriously abused by the world, so to see Joey kind of take her under her wing is really very nice. And it's a story driven like by women. Although JD's like there, he's not a main character, thankfully, because he's a dick. Apparently, the box actually came from the lunatic asylum of Dr. Psycho Channard from the previous movie. There are threads throughout this movie that connect them to each other, but I don't feel it's cohesive. There's just not enough cohesion for me to be like, yes, like we're just continuing this. And you see that in a lot of franchises. They just sort of do their own thing, maybe because they don't believe another movie's going to come out, who knows. But they try to make it as good as they can while they have it. I'd say Hellraiser has one of the more cohesive storylines, or at least storylines that go back to original ideas. And yeah, JD, once again, he's the local dipshit with the statue. He has a very inflated sense of self-importance. He seduces women and throws them away, and this entices Pinhead. And Pinhead is thirsting for blood so he can appear here on our plane. One of the girls that JD seduced gets too close, I guess, is hooked, skinned, and then eaten by the statue, because that's a thing. Then JD gets like seduced by Pinhead's ideas of, oh, ultimate pleasure, blah, blah. When he's like lying to him, it's like, it's not pleasurable for a human to be ripped apart the way he is for eternity, but whatever. He ends up getting eaten when he tries to seduce Terry into getting close to the statue. Apparently this time you don't even need to open the box, you just need to be close to the statue. So it's like, y'all, what are really the rules of the box? What I enjoy about this movie is the way they use all sorts of angles and imagery. It's very inventive. Terry ends up releasing the Cenobites, and it's like, honey, because I really feel for Terry. I think she's often taken in by people who have really bad intentions. She ends up becoming a Cenobite herself. But at least she gets to sacrifice the jackass she was dating, so there was that little bit of a good for her moment. And there was a little bit too much commentary on the war, like I was saying, because Joey is haunted by these dreams of Vietnam where her father died. And again, with like connecting to Pinhead and the evils of war, it's like, yes, war is evil, war is hell. But it was a little boring to watch because it was such an obvious thing they were going for that your mind got bored as you watched it. It's like, yeah, we know that. And Pinhead's backstory, again, like, we visited this in the last movie. I didn't really feel we needed to, except maybe as a refresher, but I think they went too far for that. We're here to watch the Cenobites fuck people up. Let's just be honest, okay? This is not about the people. At least not for me. Like, technically, yes. Hellraiser as a series is about the people who come into contact with the box. But for me, it's all about the Cenobites. So, I don't know. There were a lot of creative kills with this one. There was a girl who was very literally iced. Like, the ice came out of her drink and solidified and then stabbed her in the throat. And it's like, oh, that's pretty good. Another dude got CD'd. Like, all of his CDs, because he was the DJ. He was killed that way. Well, he was Cenobit that way. So then he turned into a Cenobite. Doc, Joey's cameraman, is actually turned into a Cenobite as well, who has a camera for an eye. Why? Who knows? It was in the script. And once again, Terry is also sadly a Cenobite now. I'd like to believe she's happy. It's hard to tell. Cenobites just seem to fully accept their fate once they've been sliced and diced and changed. The ending, though, was a little bit ineffective, just in my opinion, because they used Pinhead's humanity again, and I don't feel it works. He is clearly not human anymore. I don't feel he's going to operate for long on these, like, oh, well, he's still human somewhere. No, he's not. He is not a human anymore. Anyway, the box gets buried, Joey gets away, and the box never stays buried, does it, in horror? So I would give Hellraiser 3 probably about a 3 out of 5. I'm probably going to up Hellraiser 3.5 just because this one was a little bit worse, I'm realizing, as I'm talking about this. But it had enough to kind of keep you interested, and I think it was a fun one. But the original Hellraiser is better, so yeah. Hellraiser Bloodline, the fourth one. So, okay, I was really surprised. I actually really liked this one. It's a space laser movie that somehow works. And normally when they go to space, it's because they got bored. They didn't have enough ideas, so they were like, just send him to space. Just do it. Like, because he'll cause some shit up there. And it's like, what? Anyway, I'll give this one about 3 out of 5 pins. The first 4 movies had that continuity of Le Marchand, who had designed the box and then the lament configuration, that there is this curse that had started on their bloodline starting from 1796 during the creation of the box. We also have a very young Adam Scott, so that was super fun to see. The main demon is named Angelique, and I just didn't find her compelling. I actually found her entire arc to be a little bit boring. I love seeing women in the Hellraiser series, but it's not, for some reason, hers just didn't really appeal to me very much. Middle part's a little bit boring, but it centers around like an architect, and he's been designing unconsciously this box, and he comes into contact with it. Angelique, the demon, is released, and she doesn't like the way Pinhead is running things and the austerity of hell, so she like fights against him. She loses, and then eventually these descendants, who I'm sure have been told that, oh, hey, you're cursed now because you opened the portal, buddy. Or your ancestors did. Sorry about that. So eventually, when we got to 2127, we had gotten up to space, obviously, and this guy had designed, I don't even know, it might be the same dude, but I think it's played by the same guy, so it's like, there's no way this guy lived until 2127. This is like the 90s or something. Anyway, he's up there, and he is able to lure the Cenobites up into space and destroy them via space lasers. I am not kidding. And it's actually, it works. It weirdly works. And I don't know how to explain that one, but I really love this one. I think it's a fun entry, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's also, the story is good enough to keep you interested. So middle part's a little bit boring, so that's why I didn't really give it a higher thing. Looks like I have lost my notes for Hellraiser Inferno. It's okay. I liked this one. So I remember it fairly well. It follows this guy who has sexual addictions. He is cheating on his wife. He also does drugs. And it starts sort of opening up a box of worms for him. And I can't remember how the box comes into his life exactly, but really, like, what Hellraiser Inferno is about is the ways that we sort of keep putting ourselves into our own hells. We ruin our own lives, we hurt people in pursuit of our own selfish desires. I really like this one, although the dude kind of seemed like white bread evil. It feels very almost like puritanical, like, oh my god, he had an affair. Evil. And it's like, no, affairs aren't good, right? Because mostly you're hurting the person that you married. But it is just kind of funny how you see this play out in these early 2000s movies because it's so condemnable. I do think like drug addiction is something that is worthy of study in these movies that became really prevalent in the 2017 movie. But it just doesn't work as well here because it's so like, I am an evil man, I do bad things, and it's like, dude, you're white bread evil at best. Although I gotta say, he does seem vaguely a little bit more evil than the next dude. So the movie that comes out after this, yeah, I gotta rate it. I would say about, yeah, 3 out of 5 pins. The next one that comes out is horrible. So Hellworld Hellseeker, there are things about it that I like, but I don't like the main dude. Again, white bread evil at like the lowest tier. So something I'll give it is that 2000 movies had this new metal rock vibe that I just absolutely love. So I love watching any horror movie that came out around then because that is what was considered popular music. So I'm like, yes. Anyway, they finally kill off Kirsty. She marries this dude. It's a car accident. And her husband is the much younger guy from the commercials. Is it Allstate? I don't know. I don't watch commercials enough, but he's the mayhem guy. And I'm just kind of like sitting there like, oh, so Hell couldn't kill Kirsty, but Mayhem did. Got it. Anyway, my main issue with this particular movie was that they got lost, I felt like, in the storyline because Trevor, that was his name, it's just like the whitest name you could possibly think of, kept waking up from his own dreams, his own hallucinations. And it was very much like we didn't know what was real, which can work in a movie just as long as you don't get lost in it, and they got way lost in it. Like, we just weren't even sure if any of his interactions were real, if he was sitting at home asleep. Like, we don't know this. And it was just not, it didn't feel congruent. Like, it didn't feel like it was a full-on storyline, just that they were, like, wasting time until the end where they revealed everything, right? We have the bland, like I said, with white bread evil Trev, he is this bland male lead, and I hate how in a lot of these movies you have that without a single hint of depth, or like, I just don't believe that this man is evil. I really don't. And he goes to this abandoned warehouse because his friend tells him to, because they solve all his problems. That's what's the box is offering now, like a way to solve all your problems. And he's doing things like screwing his boss, and there's a lot of montages of this bland white bread man being a bad man with his tattoos showing, and it's just like, okay, it's very, very puritanical view of like what evil is, but all right. It wasn't very good storytelling because you got kind of lost, and after a while your brain turned off because you're like, dude, are we going somewhere with all of these hallucinations? Is there an end game? Something I did like from it is that wherever there is violence, hate, depravity, a door will always be found. Sure. And it is also about Kirsty and how the Cenobites want her. And that it seems that he found the box and presented it to her because he knew what it was. And he wanted to break away from Kirsty. I was not impressed with Pinhead's entrance into our world. He appeared from an illustration and then boom, he was there. And it's like, what? Anyway. Also, Trev this whole time is like dealing with the suspicion of her murder because I think her body wasn't found. I gave this one like a 1.5 out of 5 because it was pretty boring. and not like congruent. And the depravity was so vanilla that I was like, really? Run of the mill sex addiction with dominatrix taste. Oh my. And maybe this was considered horrible in 2002. I was fairly young. I think I was like 7 or 8. So what do I know about what was considered depraved? Naturally, the Cenobites are the best part, as are their tortures. We have a face mouth cover that's twisted and gave me some Saw vibes. And really, if you think about it, the Hellraiser movies are about the greed of humans, how we just want more and we're ruining ourselves in the process like addicts until they stumble on something worth more than they were willing to pay. The punishment for that greed then becomes this ruin of self, of mind, body, and spirit. What I really liked, though, was the twist. How any man who is awful does pay for it in the end, because it turns out that Kirsty is actually alive and she sacrifices Trev and all the women that he was cheating on her with to the Cenobites in exchange for her soul. So 5 souls for hers. It doesn't really justify it. That's kind of awful. But it's also kind of like, well, at the same time, good for her. But like, at the same time, murder is bad, you know? Especially over something like cheating. It's like, just divorce him. Like, I don't know. I think there are worse things in the world, but whatever. That's just my opinion. And then we get into Hellraiser Deader, which I enjoyed the maybe first half of this movie because it had a pretty interesting premise. A journalist, it kind of had picked up the different type of journalism. It's newspaper in this one. And it's a woman. Her name is Amy. So her boss sends her on a goose chase, I believe, to Romania because a tape was sent to him that basically shows, it's a snuff film where a girl is murdered and then this random dude basically sucks the death out of her and she wakes up after committing suicide. It is so crazy. There were some good jump scares. She finds the box in the dead girl's apartment who happened to be in the video. Themes of addiction, hedonism, enclosed spaces that hold hedonistic pleasures. And she starts hallucinating about this guy named Winter, who's the guy from the video. It goes into like this whole, like, some rabbit holes shouldn't be explored. Self-destruction also seems to be something that can't be resisted in all of these movies. How deep would you go to find the truth? Because our girl is going to get stuck in this world if she doesn't dig herself out, but she can't. She's driven. She has to know. And the Deaders are part of Winter's little cult who are all committed suicide and were brought back by Winter. And they look super ashy and vampiric. This is where it starts to get dicey because it's like, what? She's also having hallucinations, which I hate about this series because it's like, just get to the point. Stop hallucinating and let's get to the point. Because you could easily get lost in those hallucinations and not know what's real as an audience. So, like, come on. Anyway, Winter apparently chose Amy. The box belongs to him. It's been passed through generations. And he is actually related to, I believe, Le Marchand in that, like, cursed thing. The Deaders have opened a door into the Cenobite world, but it becomes them versus the Cenobites because it's in the script. I don't know. There's also the metaphor of, like, in our world, now being dead and alive are essentially the same thing. We are kind of like robots. We work half our lives and then we don't really get to enjoy it because our world's kind of going to hell. And this was in the early 2000s, so it's definitely gone to hell since then. We also have a lot of, like, Amy's demons about her father and abuse, but it's such an incoherent storyline that it makes you ultimately not care. And there's a lot of, like, weird sexual harassment comments on her ass. It's like, dude, we don't need that. I know it was a different time period and that sexual harassment was honestly so much more normalized, but come on. All right. So, and then it turns out Winter can't solve the puzzle. Only the right amount of loneliness and depravity can. Amy opens it and it's, I don't know. I had trouble with it, but she sends Winter to hell and they take him. They did away with the gore and the bonkers creativity, and also there wasn't a lot of blood. Like, we're watching these movies because we want to know about the Cenobites. We want more of the Cenobites. And her committing suicide somehow gets her out of this. And it's just really like confusing the lore. I feel like this is really where the lore started to go downhill, because I even like the idea that a certain amount of loneliness and depravity can even open the box. Not everyone's capable of it, but it's not carried through the series, which is super annoying. And it also is implied that her boss basically sacrificed her. And it's just like, I have more questions than answers. So I just really wasn't a fan of this one. Yeah, I believe Hellworld is next. But this is such a long series, guys. Oh my god. Like, I don't even know where to begin. So yeah, after Deader is Hellworld. And there are so many random famous people in this one. We have Catherine Winnick, Lance Henriksen, Henry Cavill even. And it's the last movie where Doug Bradley plays the Hell Priest Pinhead. It opens on a funeral. There's a mention of a game, Hellworld. A group of friends were all kind of addicted to it. And then one of their friends went crazy. Lance Henriksen plays the host of this party they get invited to, which I thought was actually a pretty good premise. So if you play far enough into Hellworld, you open the box. And with the box, you get a personalized invite to a Hellworld party. They all go, and the house was actually built by Philip LeMarchand. So it is all connected, but like sort of. They get a tour from Lance Henriksen because they're all newcomers. We have the disaffected, irreverent youth of America. And it's like, yeah, they would get really sucked in deep into this sort of a game, wouldn't they? The main girl has a lot of hallucinations, and again, we see that same issue. There's also this theme of hedonism at these parties. Everyone's wearing a mask. There are cell phones. Like, the masks have a number on it, and you get a cell phone, and you can call that number, and it's an anonymous satiation of the flesh. The main character, Chelsea, I guess, had a thing for the guy that had died, their friend Adam. So, fun fact about that actress, she actually is a black belt in something. I don't remember if it was like karate or taekwondo or maybe all of them, but she does at least 2 times of showing off her martial arts skills, and I love it. I love a beautiful woman who can kick your ass, because, yeah, like, don't touch her. Who do you think you are? Know what I mean? Anyway, so all of this kind of, to me, seemed like an elaborate trap to attract souls, especially considering that all humans suck a little bit. Like, we all have our foibles, we all have our sins, and our things that don't make us as good of people as we possibly could be. And the lore is brought back with Leviathan. Apparently it spoke the Cenobite realm into being. He created it and created some of the traps. And I couldn't help but wonder if some of these movies influenced Saw, because it just felt Saw-like. Pinhead gets choppy with someone's head, a grave's being dug, Chelsea's locked in an upstairs room, no one can see Josh for some reason, Henry Cavill is having fun at the party, Allison is dead. Later movies kind of did away with the idea that you had to solve or even touch the box, which kind of annoyed me. It's like, how on earth is this happening? Then there was the idea that once you enter their domain, you become invisible to the real world and you start to hallucinate. There's always an unexpectedly funny moment of these movies, like at least the ones that take themselves like a tiny bit too seriously. And Henry Cavill's like terrified. He just discovered his friend's decapitated body. And then there were times in this movie where it felt like they had started on an emotional scene and then they refilmed the end of it later. So he's freaking out. He just found his friend's dead, decapitated body, right? And he's like, hello? Anybody? And it's like, bro, the killer is there somewhere. Why are you calling out? Don't be crazy. He gets very literally hooked by a big, gigantic Cenobite hook thing to hold bodies. And at times, I don't think they were told where to look, so they just improvised. And in the editing process, some of these slip through the cracks because it's mildly hilarious how at times they're not looking in the right place, or, you know, like the acting is just off. And it's because you can tell this is a different shot. Stylistically, I enjoyed this movie, although some of the acting took me out of the moment, especially because the reactions, there's like a kill scene, like it's a hallucination, but it didn't even hit an artery or a bone and she dies. It's a shoulder flesh wound. Like, and it's like, guys, how much are we suspending reality here? Anyway, it's definitely watchable. I give it 3 out of 5 pins. There were things about it that I didn't like, but overall I liked being in Hellworld. So that's why it gets such a high rating from me. Actually, I might bring it down a little bit to a 2.5. Anyway, we find out that basically Lance Henriksen is Adam's dad, the guy who had died in the beginning, and that's why he did all this and got them all killed by the Cenobites because of the way they didn't save his son. He ends up being killed, and then we don't really understand what happens at the end, but he didn't realize that the Cenobites were real. And somehow, like, Chelsea and the dude end up together, Jake, and somehow know that this guy died. I don't know. Okay. But yeah, I'm going to bring it actually down to a 2.75. 2.5 is too low, but a 3 is a little too high. So 2.75 on this one. But it's fun, you know? Even though it's an unsatisfactory, kind of soppy ending. Anyway, now we get into Hellraiser Revelations. Oh, Lord. So everyone likes to shit on this movie. I think they tried to bring it back to like the original Hellraiser. It was just ultimately ineffective. We have this guy who's like, him and his friend end up running away to Tijuana of all places. And yeah, like these two dumbasses meet a homeless guy in a bar in Mexico. Weird shit starts. And one of the dudes accidentally kills a sex worker. And yeah, like shit gets crazy from there. And then there was this part that I can't. It was so funny. It made me cackle. So this guy's like, who are you? Get the fuck out of here. And then completely deadpan, the new Pinhead is like, no. And it's like, what? like it just, some of the script you're like, what, we couldn't think of something more badass to say than no, I'm not leaving, man. Come on. Emma, who her brother and her boyfriend are both missing, and they were the local dumbasses who opened the box. And yeah, there's this whole rich white boy thing and wanting more. And one of the things that really took me out of the movie is the fact that like one of the guys looks a lot like my brother-in-law. So I was just like, he better not do that. Like, that's my sister. And it's like, no. But he really does look enough like him that I was like, that's weird. So I guess we have a skin suit again. Nico put on Steven's skin suit. Steven is the other guy. Nico is the one who opened the box. Steven is the guy who's like, I can't do this, man. Nico gets dragged to hell. Steven is implored by Nico from hell, please bring me bodies. He does it for a bit, but then he's like, no, I don't want to do this, which is fair. And I really just feel bad for Steven. But he ends up being dragged to hell, and Nico comes back wearing Steven's skin and takes parents and Emma hostage. And it's all very, very weird. There was even a scene where like this is supposed to be her brother and he tries to seduce her and it works, and I'm just like, what is this? And then we find out, yeah, it's actually her ex-boyfriend who's a piece of shit while Steven's like stuck in hell. He's becoming like Pinhead Jr. My main issue is that the new Pinhead, there was something about his face that just wasn't effective in this role. I've even seen memes where like when you get Pinhead from Wish, and it's like that's kind of how I felt about it. Like nobody can replace Doug Bradley, not really. And I understand recasting and all that sort of thing. It's just that this guy, he just didn't seem to fit the role. And that happened a little bit throughout this movie. The writing, it was ineffective. The acting actually wasn't too bad, except for Pinhead, but it didn't save this movie, the acting or some of the makeup and effects being pretty good. 1.75. It's not good. But it tried to go back to the roots of Hellraiser, so I'll give them credit for that. But unfortunately, it's not the best movie in the world. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it. So, Hellraiser Judgment is not a good movie. The opening sequence is actually one of the most interesting in the film, and I think it's because it gave that whole 2000s The Cell vibe. This like surrealist thing, this child murderer gets lured to this abandoned place. He is judged by the assessor, who is a Cenobite, and then he gets punished based on how much his guilt is. It's a very interesting scene, but unfortunately, it's the only thing about this movie that I would watch. It's like the first 10 minutes or something. Although there was a really funny part where he's like, Jesus Christ. And the guy's like, oh no, same city, completely different zip code. And I just thought that was funny. It's just not really worth your time, the rest of the movie, because it's all very irritating and not a good storyline. So I give that opening sequence 3.5, maybe even a 3.75 out of 5, but the rest of the movie is about a 1.5. It's not good. It's not stomachable. Hellraiser 2017, I actually liked it. I thought a little bit in the middle was boring, but I did really love the new conceptualization of the Hell Priest as a woman. Jamie Clayton is amazing in this role, and I thought the acting was pretty good. I mean, we've got this like local dipshit, the super rich dude who wants more, and it seems like the rich are always like super hungry. Bro at the party is lured and sacrificed because the rich dude wants to meet Leviathan, then like get a gift from the Cenobites, because there's like a huge misunderstanding about what they are and what they do to humans. But this movie to me is about how the rich see the poor as expendable. Roland Voight is the name of the local dipshit, local rich dude, who's trying to lure people and give the box bodies. You have to feed the box. It also centers on a woman struggling with addiction, which has been touched on in some way or another throughout the series, and it addresses the cycles of guilt, anger, relapse of a recovering addict, as they feel everybody who loves them is ashamed of them, while they're usually trying to help, but it can be hard, I think, whenever there's recovery, where you feel that they will never fully give you a chance to recover. I felt like it was trying to say that addiction tears apart the love that we have for other people. Families disintegrate. This movie's really about the weakness and the vulnerable fleshy parts of us, desire, and the ways that they can get the better of us. We have another Trevor, who predictably is also a shithead who betrays her. It's her sort of boyfriend. He brings her to a warehouse heist that belongs to Roland Voight, and they find the box, and that's the only thing they find. They were hoping to sell something, and as she plays with the box, which I feel is a metaphor for addiction, her brother Matt, who's been helping her, becomes trapped because he accidentally shed blood on the box, and it takes him. I'll give it like a 3 out of 5 pins. I thought it was good, not great, but I'm excited for the future. I'd like to see where the Hellraiser series goes with Jamie Clayton, and I hope they go in that direction. And the lore was actually super interesting in this one. The different configurations, there's 5 of them, and the final one gives you an audience with Leviathan. Voight assumed that the Cenobites were like angels, and meeting Leviathan was like meeting God. It gives passage to another realm, a choice of life, love, power, knowledge, sensation, or resurrection. And throughout the movie, they're told that like Roland Voight is actually dead because he mysteriously disappeared. He's not. He's the boy in the walls. Like if you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. But he's trying to just lure more people so he can get another audience. He did not like the gift they gave him, which is like a spine contraption that hurts all of the time. It never lets up. It makes his nerves be on end the entire time. So it sucks. I do feel there was a little bit too much CGI with the Cenobites. And I'm not a huge fan of CGI in general. I think it's great for tiny things, but maybe not for entire designs. I love practical effects. I think they're awesome. And I think they look real. And that's like the whole point of them. But anyway. The box has to be fed to unlock the next configuration. If not you, then another can be chosen to be in your place, which does sort of go along with like what had happened in Hellseeker, because Kirsty was able to give the Cenobites 5 souls instead of her own. And Trevor the boyfriend, was actually hired by Voight. So it's pretty fucked up to prey on somebody so vulnerable that way. Anyway, but like Voight really paid for his decision because he chose sensation. And we see the greed of Trevor and Voight. You think that by now someone would realize that fucked up and mutilated is not from somewhere that you would want to go as a person and experience things. Like, come on. I love that they kept Leviathan, though, as the big bloody diamond thing. Like, anything makes sense, truly. Of course, their god is a 3D diamond. Whatever. Voight had... his house is actually a cage because he needed them to make him right again. Riley lets them in so that she actually claims the prize. The Cenobites end up giving Voight the Leviathan configuration. It makes the machine fall out of him and his torn flesh knit back together, but he ends up becoming another Cenobite and is up with Leviathan now. I don't know. Like, it was all a little difficult to understand, to be honest. And also Dickweed, Trevor, goes in Riley's place. I love that when men or women actually are awful, they end up paying for it in this series. Riley ends up choosing to have nothing from the Cenobites, realizing that their gifts are nothing you would ever want. So in this way, she has actually chosen the Lament configuration, which is life. She has to live with all the regret of those that she hurt. And also, Matt never escapes hell. He is still in hell, and there's nothing she can do about it because she knows that even if they brought him back, because resurrection is one of the gifts they can give, it won't be her brother. It's all got to suck a little bit, but everybody, I feel, pays for the ways that they have personally fucked up. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a lot. That was a lot of movies that I just watched. I hope you enjoyed my commentary on the Hellraiser series. And next month, I'm going to be doing an episode on mermaids and sirens. So join me for that. Thanks so much for listening. And yeah, I really hope your day does not have any Cenobites in it because they're weird, man. They freak me out. Like, I don't know. They don't freak me out in like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrified of them on the screen. More like, what if you met one of these damn things? I don't like that. So, yeah. Have a good one. Bye-bye.